Welcome to Partnering with Nature, a Biophilic Cities webinar series. I'm Rebecca Fornaby, a research associate with the Biophilic Cities project at the University of Virginia. Through this series, we will hear from practitioners and researchers who are designing resilient and adaptive urban nature, engaging the public to protect and enhance their blue and green infrastructure, and addressing environmental justice issues through research and on-the-ground projects. The Biophilic Cities project started at UVA in 2011 to explore and advance nature in cities. In the fall of 2013, the Global Biophilic Cities Network was launched, with partner cities spanning the globe from Phoenix, Arizona, to Singapore, to Wellington, New Zealand. The webinar series is one of the many ways in which the new Global Biophilic Cities Network will help to disseminate knowledge about the innovative work of cities, organizations, and individuals around the world. To learn more about the project, visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and at biophilic-cities.org. Today we'll be hearing from Danielle Bilot, founder and creative director of Bumble Fumble. Danielle completed her thesis on integrating pollinator habitat into urban frameworks at the University of Oregon in 2013. Her research created methods for analyzing local pollinator species for habitat distribution strategies across urban and rural land uses. She has worked on the White House Pollinator Action Plan to develop priority actions and continues to give presentations at professional conferences around the U.S. She's currently finishing Bumble Fumble, a website that offers a simple guide for creating native bee habitat and information that helps eliminate misconceptions against bees. Danielle will speak for about 30 minutes and then answer a few questions about her work. Welcome, Danielle.
Hi, everyone. As Rebecca said, my name is Danielle Bilot, and today on this webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about transportation and pollinator habitat, specifically bee habitats, and for good reason. Bees pollinate about 2/3 of the food that we eat, but stocks have declined massively in past decades. In about 58 years, stocks declined about 58%. And these are not sustainable losses for the honeybee commercial community. When bees decrease in diversity and quantity, so will our food, and so will our landscapes. All the food shown in this picture are available because of bee pollination. And we can't go around hand pollinating all of these foods. What is food for bees often becomes food for us. And that's one of the biggest reasons why this should matter to everybody. And I don't know about you, but I'm not willing to think about my avocados or blueberries without a fight. So there's a lot of talk about what is causing rapid bee decline, but really there are two main issues that need to be amended before we can make any real headway with their populations. And those are the contemporary misconceptions against bees, which is a strong mental barrier, and the lack of frequent, adequate habitat for them, which is a big physical barrier. Today we're going to address both, but first let's explain a little bit graphically what the real physical reason is as to why bee populations are dying and can't recover as easily. So we have a diagram here. You know, bees are living at one of these habitat spaces, and they reside there for as long as things are in bloom. Problem is diversity in plants and crops are decreasing within a small amount of area. So most often, these areas are in bloom for 3 to 4 weeks out of the year, and then the bees have to fly to the next habitat space in order to be able to find more food. But the problem is the great distance between these spaces. Some of these bees, they can only fly 3 or 4 blocks before they need more food. But since there's so much of a gap, they can't reach it in time and end up dying in the process. The problem that we're experiencing isn't if we build it, will they come? It's if we build it, can they leave? Because otherwise, we are basically potentially creating population sinks in these habitats for them if they can't move throughout the landscape. But luckily, urban areas are in a very unique position to create almost stepping stone habitats for these bees. And we can bring in the outside rural bees and sustain our current urban bee populations as well. I decided to tackle more urban strategies for this because truth is we can't change a big egg overnight. And we need change now, and we can't wait for anything else. And this is something that we can control. So we can actually do this with the help of kind of unlikely allies. And so today, we're going to talk about how parks and parking lots and other transit corridors can actually help us save the composition of both our landscapes and our dinner plates. So first, let's talk a little bit about these bees. Honeybees are one type of bee. They are one species of bee, and they're relatively limited in their plant interactions. But we're actually going to talk about today native bees. And these are the bees that are more efficient, that do not sting, and cost next to nothing. Here's a little picture of what some of these bees look like. And as you can see, they're not really the typical bee that you think of. Some of these are metallic green, or purple, or big and gray and fuzzy. They're all different sizes and shapes and colors. And the variety in their species reflects the variety of things that they pollinate as well. One big important thing to remember is that monopollinators, one pollinator creates and supports more of a monoculture. If we have more diverse pollinators, we will support a more diverse crop and landscape as well. And there's a few reasons why these bees are really, really awesome. So first is safety. Out of the over 4,000 species of native bees in the US alone, compared to one for honeybee, 95% of those 4,000 species do not sting. That is more the job of a honeybee or a yellow jacket or a wasp. And so that's a big misconception. Oftentimes when you see something flying next to you and it's little, it's not really a fly. Look closer. There's a good chance that that's actually a native bee. The second reason is because of their efficiency, that they're amazing. Honeybees pollinate at roughly a 72% efficiency rate, while native bees pollinate at about a 91% efficiency rate. And in some cases, it's been recorded that just over 200 native bees can do the same level of pollination as a hive containing over 10,000 worker bees. And the third reason is cost. Hive rentals for commercial honeybees are up to $200 or $300 a week in some areas. And we are spending a lot of money on pollination services that we can be using elsewhere. California's almond crop in one year spent $294 million in pollination services alone, which is roughly the equivalent of sending 80,000 people to a four-year college for free, or 162 million free school lunches. The blueberry crop spends at least $9 million a year in pollination services. And don't get me wrong, we definitely need honeybees, especially for some crops that are in bloom a little bit earlier in the year, a week or two before these native bees come out fully. But the idea behind this is, if we start using these native bees, we can start saving economically and making smarter choices with the money that we're spending. So it'll reflect back to the consumer as well. And there's three things that we need to know about these native bees in order to design and attract them to our spaces. Nesting habits, their foraging habits, and their body size. So the first two, they relate to more site design techniques. And we're going to go into those first. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about the distribution that's necessary for these habitats that we just went over in the diagram before. So first, what do these guys require on the ground in order to live there, or in order to at least pass through there? And the first thing that we need to account for is their nesting. So these are the bees that live in hives. These guys either live in bare ground or they live in softwood. And the vast majority of them live in bare ground. When we put lawn everywhere or we mulch all these areas that are normally bare ground patches, that's native bee habitat that we're getting rid of. And mulch is very useful, obviously, especially when it decomposes. But we need to leave a few bare ground patches so these bees can go in and out of their habitat easily. Native bees are mostly solitary, so it's just them and maybe a kid or two, going in and out of this hole. So there's not any crazy swarms that are involved with these guys. They don't live in their hives like honeybees do. So also, we need to consider what exactly do they need for food to either help reside there or pass through as well. They need a variety of year-round food, which means that plants need to be in bloom every month of the year that it's possible in your area. Bloom times are longer in the south versus the north, but native bees are active for all months that plants are in bloom. And so making sure that we have at least 3 plants is preferable for every month that there are blooms, but at least 1 so that you can provide something for them. And bees are mostly attracted to flowers that are closer to the blue end of the spectrum. So if you ever have a question on if a bee will be attracted to it, go with your blue and purple flowers most often. There's obviously sunflowers and whatnot. There's different flowers that are attractive that aren't blue, but that's a good rule of thumb to almost guarantee that they will be attracted to it. And then each one of these plants needs to be planted in a swath that is 15 to 18 square feet in area minimum. And the reason behind this is because bees don't see individual plants very well. And if we're trying to attract them in urban areas, sometimes during certain parts of the day, there's higher rates of pollution. And so they can't smell their food. And they need to be able to see or smell it in order to reach it. So by planting a swath, we are guaranteeing more so that they will be able to see it even if they can't smell it. And on the ground, there needs to be significantly more foraging in a habitat site than nesting, about 20% nesting to 80% foraging. And since we're talking about transportation and pollinators today, this is what it would look like, that ratio, if it was applied to parking lots. So I use Houston, Texas as my test case. It is what I used for my thesis. And as you can see here, all of these outlines are for the parking lots that are in this small area. And on one site, the brown represents the nesting. And so that is about 20% nesting that is dispersed throughout different areas. You don't just want to put it in one corner. And then the foraging is dispersed throughout as well. And that's where you would see all your different colored blooms and shapes of flowers and trees and things like that. So here's what it would look like on the ground. If you walked by one of these parking lots that we are proposing to change, this is what it would be like. You would see these swaths of different plants. And the beautiful thing about this is that parking lots, they already have regulations attached to them in almost all cities, where they require a screening around them. So we aren't proposing to decrease parking or change any type of land uses. We're just saying, hey, let's be smarter about our plant choices. Instead of requiring a monoculture hedgerow around these parking lots, just one shrub around the whole thing, let's make it diverse. So there's other strategies that we can apply too. We can add fruiting trees to the corner of it. It's very rich pollen and nectar sources. There could be boulders placed in this landscape, especially for colder areas. It helps maintain heat throughout the night so that the bees are active earlier in the mornings. And we can also deal with water features. Obviously, bees need water, but the water is also useful so they can create mud to pack up their solitary ground nests or wood nests as well. And if you look at this, it's way more appealing to look at than a single type of plant that is going around the whole parking lot. And the reason that there's screening hedgerows in the first place is to screen. But psychologically, our eye goes to what's different. And so if the planting row around the entire parking lot is the same plant. What's different is the cars behind it with their sizes and forms and colors. But that's not what we want people to look at. If we diversify this planting row around them, we'll be more attracted to look at the plants. And it'll be more of a place for people and pollinators than just a parking lot for cars. So that's a little bit about more of the site characteristics of things. But where this really takes off is in the distribution of habitats. So in order to know how to do this and know why parking lots are so important for this fact, we're going to look at their body size. What had been done originally was there was a benchmark body size, say 10 millimeters. And people would say, okay, over 10 millimeters, these bees can fly this far, and under 10 millimeters, these bees can fly this far. But it's much more than that. We needed to break down the categories further. So I took a look at the native bee species that are located in Houston, which every urban area has at least 100 species. So don't be fooled, they're in your city too, even if you don't see them. And so here I created 5 different categories of bees, from extra small to extra large. And I'm going to be overlaying this on top of a section of Houston so that it'll show you why we need all of these habitat spaces. So the little section of Houston, Texas I took was about a 1.5 mile area of the downtown core. And first, what I did was just outline the green spaces that are existing within this area and said, okay, so what if we just added some plants to our existing public green spaces? Would that be enough to help save these bees? And here's the reason why it's not. So I placed the biggest bees, the large native bees, the carpenter bees and bumblebees that can fly the farthest. These guys can fly 3/4 of a mile before they need more food, no problem. And so each circle around these bees represents how far they can fly before they need another habitat spot. And so if the circles are overlapping, that means that they are likely to be able to get to the next spot in time. So for the extra large native bees, it's not a problem. But look what happens when we just go one body size category down. There's already gaps of a couple of blocks in between these habitat spaces. And so it's not guaranteed that these bees can reach the next space in time. But what if we added parking lots? Just by doing that, we have almost quadrupled the number of spaces that bees can use as just a quick foraging spot or a nesting spot for themselves. And now look what happens. The large native bees are fine. Their circles overlap. The medium ones, same thing. The small bees, and even the extra small specialists can potentially move throughout this space now, which is absolutely crazy. We've been trying to figure this out for so long, and parking lots and transportation can really, really help us out in this. There's the Highway B Act that's out there, and that would create large swaths in between major cities for them to move as well. All scales of transportation are really necessary to make this happen. And so I started to look more at Houston. I looked at the little downtown study area and where the existing major green spaces are within the city. And as you notice, there's the big Memorial Park, there's Buffalo Bayou and Herman Park, and all of these have a lot of pollinator plants within them. I lived there for a few years and have walked them all, and there's plenty of pollinators moving around there. But these guys, they run east to west, and so we're missing a major north-south connection for them to move. And upon looking a little deeper, there is something that connects them more north to south, and that's the light rail corridor. Here's what it looks like right now. We have this whole area that is a very linear space. People don't necessarily hang out here either, but there's sidewalks on either side. And when you're walking past this, it's just a monoculture area. There's like 1 or 2 different plants in there, but they're all hedged. You don't see any flowers in there. But what if it was this? all these plants are more attractive for people to look at, for pollinators to use as foraging, and they also are multi-purposeful. Some of these are great phytoremediators too. You know, they help purify our water and our soil. There's multiple layers to this, for sure. So all transportation corridors, they really matter. And it's great because they already have regulations attached to them. So we don't have to go about trying to force people to change the way that they act in their daily lives or propose new regulations that would take a long time to adapt. There are lists of acceptable parking lot plants in different cities, and all we have to do is change those words on a page. And there's other things that we can do to help out pollinators as well. With federal grants, the Farm Bill right now, you know, says, hey, if you convert X percentage of your farmland into pollinator habitat, we'll give you a tax credit. The problem is that it doesn't specify a distribution along with that. And so that's what needs to be adapted. We need to say, okay, you know, convert 10 to 15% of your land into this, but it has to be across the whole space. Because what if there's a bee in the center of this mile area? It's likely that he won't be able to reach the outlying edge pollinator habitat in time. And then national and local legislation, you know, like we were talking about, the Highway Bee Act, that's something that we can go for. The Representative Blumenthal in Oregon, he is making very, very awesome headway to try and adapt other different transportation corridors to have these multiple layered uses as well, because not only does it attract pollinators, but it's less for maintenance too, and that's always an appealing factor. As for LEED-in sites, LEED is the green building certification, and sites is a green landscape certification. But neither of these have direct points for pollinator habitat. And that's something that definitely needs to change. You know, sites is big for landscape. It's promoting the sustainability of all the spaces in between the buildings. And we need to make sure that we state that we want pollinator habitat here. We don't need to always, you know, reinvent the wheel. Let's just change the tread on it, you know, add something here and there. And then as far as wildlife corridor habitats, we often think that they need to be continuous spaces of green, connected spaces. And it's hard to set aside that much land to do so. But what this is showing, especially for insects, is that there can be minor fragmentation in here, and they can still adapt super, super well to any type of situation as long as they are in sight or smell of their food. So I encourage everybody here to go out and see what they can do, whether it's in their backyard, because those are also viable habitat spaces. What you choose to put in your yard, that can be one of the stepping stone habitat spaces. Or go to your city council and say, hey, do we have parking lot regulations already for plants? What plants do we allow? Are there different plants that we could be using that actually bloom and attract pollinators and are more attractive for us as well? So I hope everyone, you got a little bit of a new intro into the world of bees, and that you shouldn't really be afraid of them all. You know, they're not out to get you. They don't want to sting you, and these native bees, they don't even sting. And they don't require much. They just require a little bit of our attention. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for sharing your research with us, Danielle. We only have a couple questions for you. First, how would you say the presence of native bees affects honeybees?
So that's a little diamond in the rough there too. It has been shown that actually having both native bees and honeybees within a space increases competition and increases pollination efficiency in both of them. And I would assume that is because of, you know, competition of resources. When there are more bees there are less resources to go around per bee. And so each one works harder to get to that pollen and nectar. And so you actually get better pollination when you have both of them together in a site.
Great. And second, just looking ahead to the future, where is your research headed and what are you excited about?
So as for the website, it'll be done in a couple weeks, which will be awesome. It is a great, useful tool for the public. Anyone can go on there and find out what is really causing our bee decline and what can we do about it to save our landscapes and our dinner plates. And so when you go on there, there is a blog that'll be helpful with links attached to it for things that are current and up to date about bees. But there is also a downloadable how-to guide. One of the biggest barriers is the misconception about bees, but it is also the fact that people don't have a quick, short guide that tells them directly, you know, this is what I can do in my backyard, or this is what I can take to my city council meeting and show them what to do. Most things are, you know, websites where you have to click multiple times, or these large books, and that's not feasible for someone, you know, who's working 10 to 12 hours a day. This way, you can just download, you know, the one page, both sides, print it out, or just look at it on your phone and go into your garden and apply these principles. And after the website's up, I will begin working on a game app, actually. That is how I would like to teach children and teens and really myself, because I would definitely play the game, about native bees. And so everything in this game is directly transferable into real life. You know, it's not really like Angry Birds where you come out of it thinking that birds like to be thrown from slingshots and are fat. But this game is more so where you go and you pick your native bee player. And each one of them has a superpower. So the digger bee can dig underneath the ground when the varroa mites are attacking. Or the leaf cutter bee can take a leaf and deflect the attack and fly underneath the pollution that's coming. And so in a fun way, it teaches kids these directly transferable characteristics about bees that are true. And none of their superpowers are that they can sting, because they can't. And I want to teach kids especially, don't be afraid. These are really your friends. It reminds me of, you know, the Finding Nemo quote, fish are friends, not food. Well, bees are friends, not enemies. And we should treat them as such.
That sounds great. That's really exciting. And we'll definitely look out for your website. And when this webinar goes live, we'll post a link for everyone so that they can find you.
Awesome.
I guess that concludes this Biophilic Cities webinar, Designing for Diversity, Transportation, and Pollinator Habitat, brought to you by Danielle Bilot. So thank you everyone for watching, and thanks again for sharing your work with us, Danielle.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.